And lastly, under ordinances and resolutions, we have a resolution authorizing the commencement by the Army Corps of Engineers of the design phase of work on the Groveland Avenue Levee Project 205 Flood Risk Management Project, pursuant to an existing project partnership agreement between the Department of the Army and the Village of Riverside, Illinois. Manager Francis.
What you have before you is a resolution authorizing Army Corps to complete the design process for Groveland Avenue Levee. They have started prelim design. However, this would allow them to finish / complete the design piece, which would provide answers to a lot of the questions that the board members and also residents have had related to this project. Included in the agenda history sheet includes a summary of the different meeting dates that have occurred with regard to discussion on this item. We also have Jeff Zerker from Army Corps of Engineers present to answer any questions that the board or residents may have, in addition to our village engineer, Orion Gately.
Thank you very much. So I think the way we'll do this, we do have some folks who would like to provide public comment. I know we also have received public comment via email that we're also going to read. And it looks like the first person we have that would like to speak is Jacqueline Miller. Ms. Miller?
Good evening.
Good evening.
President Sells and trustees, my name is Jacqueline Miller. My husband, Jeff, and I live at 240 Maplewood Road. We submit these comments on the Groveland Levee project. Last year, President Sells wrote in a landmark that past, current, and future residents share, quote, a natural setting that inspired Olmsted to create the nation's first conservation designed community based on his seminal insight that beauty is a civic necessity. Will the flood wall help maintain a sustainable village that emphasizes our obligations as stewards of our forest, river, and landscape? Located at a village entrance, the flood wall will extend almost 1/2 mile. Its height and 30-foot exclusion zone will be unnatural and stark. Cutting through the backyards of West Avenue properties, it will sever residents' connection with the river and block their views. Destroying these people's property is cruel. Homeowners whose properties back to Park Place also will have to live with a concrete wall and 15-foot exclusion zone. As Jeff Zerker mentioned during his December 3rd presentation, federal and state governments are beginning to acknowledge that climate change will cause more severe storms. Although the Corps has started the process of updating the model for the Des Plaines River, and it indicates a higher probability of 100-year flood events in this area, the flood wall hasn't been analyzed using these new rainfall projections. Before proceeding, the board should insist that the Corps rerun its models. Without further analysis, we don't know if the flood wall might be overtopped during future more severe rain events, nor do we know if homes upstream of the flood wall will suffer larger volumes of river water backing up along the north end of the wall. Non-structural measures may provide solutions while not harming other residents. Non-structural remedies are utilized by the Corps, other governmental bodies, and private landowners. In fact, as part of the Upper Des Plaines River Flood Risk Management Project, the Corps has identified hundreds of structures in other communities which will benefit from non-structural measures or will be further analyzed. The Corps has allocated millions of dollars to non-structural measures at other Midwest flood risk management projects. When it came to Riverside, however, the Corps chose not to assess non-structural measures, despite guidance requiring it as part of all flood risk management projects. Zerker has stated, quote, we have non-structural as part of the Upper Des Plaines Phase 2 project, but if a structural solution is justified, it is not something that we look at for an impacted area. This is the precise issue facing the board, whether or not the Corps' chosen solution of the flood wall is justified. The criteria and values important to Riverside, though, are different than the criteria in the Corps' scoring methodology, which weighs the estimated costs of the work against predicted economic benefits. That's it. Even using this tightly limited methodology, the flood wall has a low 1.5 benefit cost ratio score. 3 other levees the Corps studied as part of the Upper Des Plaines project were scored at 2.4, 3.2, and 3.9. Zerker has asserted, when you look at the number of homes impacted in the area we are proposing to protect, non-structural would quickly become more expensive than the option to build a flood wall. This casual claim about the monetary cost of non-structural measures without support from a written work plan shouldn't be a basis for this board's accepting the flood wall. Factors besides monetary cost should be weighed as well. One couple whose Riverside home is on the displays implemented non-structural remedies by building a third floor on their home and adapting the first floor so that floodwaters can enter. And they did this work without government assistance. Another potential solution that's been too readily dismissed by the Corps is realigning the train bridge piers. Apparently, the Corps simply accepted BNSF's statement that it isn't interested, yet this work would ameliorate flood levels without causing harm to others and creating a massive eyesore. If the Corps won't properly study the comparative costs and efficacy of non-structural measures and bridge realignment, then the village should discuss these matters with MWRD and other agencies. Without spending any money, the village could change zoning code provisions so as to aid floodproofing, such as by allowing increased building heights. And the village could actively facilitate measures tailored to each structure and the interest, capability, ambition of each property owner with a cost share expected. And now I have a few questions. If the pump stations turn out to be inadequate, is there a remedial plan? Will the Corps legally be obligated to re-engineer the system? Does the obligation last for 5, 10, 20 years? Is the board's confidence in the Corps' expertise reduced by learning that a temporary sandbag wall will need to be built and maintained by village personnel? Has the village or anyone shown residents whose homes back up to Park Place where the flood wall will be put and which of their trees will be cut down? How will enforcement be conducted against homeowners who do unauthorized work in the exclusion zone? What's the likelihood that the flood wall will be decorated by graffiti? Because the rear of West Avenue properties slope down to the river, will rainwater pond in the areas between the flood wall and existing buildings? If so, will this ponded rainwater cause damage, perhaps flooding basements and lower levels? Will these property owners have legal recourse against the Corps, the state, or the village? Please provide estimates of all one-time and ongoing project-related costs that the village will have to pay in the future. If riverbank erosion needs to be addressed, who will have the short and long-term legal, financial, and functional obligations? If the village will, what's the projected cost of that? What's the expected life of the flood wall? 50 years? Are federal or state governments obligated to maintain or remove the flood wall at that time? At this moment, the board shouldn't feel forced to accept or reject the Corps' only proffered solution. Please vote no to authorizing the flood wall's design phase. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Appreciate that. Next up is David Barcati. Mr. Barcati.
Thank you. I'm here today to express my concern for the proposed flood wall in Riverside. The flood wall will only mitigate flooding for a select few Riverside residents, but will undoubtedly make flooding worse for residents living upstream, downstream, and west of the flood wall. The Army Corps of Engineers claims that the flood wall will not make flooding worse, but empirical evidence and the results of a study they themselves conducted contradicts their claims. The Army Corps of Engineers conducted a study in 1852 when they commissioned a study that proves that flood walls cause waters to rise higher and flow faster. Now, granted, that is an old study, but more recent studies, which I will get to in a moment, continue to confirm that flood walls cause waters to rise higher and flow faster. The proposed flood wall will make flooding worse on First Avenue. First Avenue is routinely shut down between Ogden and Ridgewood when flooding has occurred. First Avenue is a major thoroughfare and is highly dependent by first responders. Flooding more of First Avenue will make it more difficult for first responders to reach people in need of assistance. The village on their website has stated that flooding along the Des Plaines River will not be made worse in other areas for the river will flow, quote, into a depressed bowl around Groveland Avenue that then acts as a reservoir of still non-flowing water, end quote. It is difficult to believe that the water that would have flooded properties east of Groveland would not have a measurable effect on the flooding of First Avenue and properties west of the river. Furthermore, the bowl is not getting any deeper to hold the water that would have gone east of the river. The water has to go somewhere. It is simple physics. Models are as good as the assumptions and data that go into the models. I understand that several people have looked at the proposal, and I'm confident that it was not created in a vacuum. But it is concerning that the model cannot be validated until after the flood wall has been constructed. The residents upstream, downstream, and west of the river are assuming all of the risk and receiving none of the benefits of the proposed flood wall. There is a preponderance of evidence and studies that demonstrate that these models can be wrong. One needs to only look at the Merrimack River in Missouri, the Mississippi River in Illinois and Louisiana, and the Pennsylvania Susquehanna River, where flooding has shifted from one group to another group. If that is not enough evidence, I would encourage you to look at academic studies from the University of Minnesota, Augustana College, and Southern Illinois University, which further demonstrates that flood walls shift the flooding burden to others. And I'm more than happy, and I will send you this information later tonight. It is tempting to approve this project given that there is little to no financial impact to the village, but this proposal should not be based on verbal assurances. Numerous studies and research continue to prove and demonstrate that flood walls do not reduce flooding. By voting to move forward with this project, you are essentially saying that one group of residents, those who bought along the Des Plaines River knowing the flood risk, should receive all the benefits of the flood wall, but other residents who live upstream, downstream, and to the west of the Des Plaines River should assume all of the risk. Please do not vote to move forward with this plan that shifts the risk of flooding from one group of residents to another. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barcati. Next up is Aberdeen Marsh-Ozga. Ms. Marsh-Ozga.
Okay, hello. My name is Aberdeen Marsh-Ozga. I reside at 150 Nuttall Road in Riverside. I'm a member of the Preservation Commission, but this afternoon I wrote a letter on my own behalf to the board. I received responses and acknowledgement from Trustee Evans and Trustee Hannon, for which I thank you, because I do not know whether the rest of you who are obviously busy and getting inundated with emails have had time to review it. I will read it for the record. Let me start by saying that flood relief is definitely of great importance to all communities that experience flooding. And the Army Corps has several approaches for addressing it as efficiently as possible. Flood walls have been built throughout the country, but none within an Olmsted designed National Historic Landmark. A thoughtful design approach is really needed to achieve the best possible outcome for residents and visitors alike. Riverside's listing on the National Register of Historic Places requires federal agencies such as the Army Corps to fully analyze the effects of their undertakings on the historic resource and to mitigate potentially adverse impacts. The process is governed by Section 106 of the National Environmental Protection Act, called NEPA. And there are a series of steps involved. Each one is predicated on the step before. If a determination is made that a proposed federal action could adversely affect a historic resource, then Section 110F of the National Historic Preservation Act also applies. This section mandates that federal agencies use a higher standard of care with respect to national landmarks. It is unclear whether the Groveland Levee project has benefited from a full and fair 106 process. A reasonable good faith effort is required on the part of the agency to engage the State Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service to first identify the historic resource and then to assess the effects of the project on that resource, and finally to resolve any adverse effects. With respect to the flood control measures proposed here, the Army Corps advised our village manager several weeks ago that the Section 106 NEPA review was done as part of its Upper Des Plaines River feasibility study in 2013 and 2014. However, nowhere in connection with its discussion of the Groveland Levee does that study mention Riverside's landmark status. Instead, it reports, quote, initial assessments indicate that all 4 levee locales have previously been surveyed for cultural resources and no archaeological or historic resources are present, end quote. That is at page 212 of the feasibility study. This conclusion for a project that is situated within Riverside's National Register boundaries is inaccurate. It suggests that there's no meaningful dialogue between the agency, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the National Park Service as contemplated by NEPA's Section 106 and 110 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Well in advance of our Preservation Commission meeting last week, the village requested that the Corps provide it with a copy of its original Section 106 submittal to the State Historic Preservation Office and that office's response, or if they never responded, a statement to that effect from the Corps. The Corps was unable to produce the requested documentation by the date of our meeting and invited the Commission to review the feasibility study and appendices posted on the Corps' website. The only NEPA notices there, set forth within Appendix L, do not identify Riverside as a project site. It is unclear to me how anyone on the lengthy distribution list could infer that one of the potential projects within the Upper Des Plaines watershed is proposed to be built in Riverside. If this is the extent of the Army Corps' notice to the Illinois Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service in connection with the Groveland Levee project, it fails to meet the intent of Section 106. Now, the Preservation Commission was unaware until just recently that the Corps had considered its Section 106 review complete. The Corps had last presented this concept to the Commission at its December 13th, 2018 meeting. Following the Corps' presentation, our Commission chair noted that the Section 106 process would be forthcoming, and the Corps did not disagree at that time. Nonetheless, here we are. Riverside has been summarized in the feasibility study as a project site with no historic or cultural significance. Before committing to the Corps' design approach and the substantial potential expense to the village, and what I do believe to be an important undertaking, it seems prudent and appropriate to defer the decision on this matter until such time as the Army Corps can produce the documentation requested. That is all.
Thank you, Ms. Maszalska. Do we have anyone else in the queue here? Would any of the other folks who have joined us on this Zoom, would you like to address the board at this time before we move to the trustee discussion? Mr. Stack, I see you talking, but you're muted.
I believe Kimber Coons is next in line.
Okay, I don't see that on my chat feed here. Ms. Coombs?
Oh, hi there. I think I'm talking to Director Johns in a private chat somehow. Sorry about that. I'm not so sure this is really public comment, but I had a couple of questions. And I'd just like to thank the board and the community because I've been way more educated in the last 2 weeks about this issue, and Mr. Zerker as well, because he's been great about answering a lot of personally my questions. So thank you for that. So this isn't so much public comment, but I had a couple of questions that I wasn't able to glean answers to. So I'll just kind of throw those out if that's okay. So one of the questions is in regards to Governor Pritzker. He just announced first phase of a bunch of budget cuts of more than 70 million. And I've heard discussions that the budget for this project for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers part, right, the 65% is approved, but that we could lose it. So I was just wondering if Jeff could, or somebody could communicate whether that's true. Maybe that's incorrect. Maybe I heard incorrectly. And do we know what happens if our financing or the budgeted amounts of money is rolled back due to the COVID deficits that we're going to see? I'm also wondering.
Yeah, Ms. Coons, why don't you go ahead and just give us all the questions, and then We're gonna
That's what I was gonna do, yeah.
Okay, good.
So that was the first one. The second one is again a budget question. The total project budget is around 7 million, 7 and a bit. If the project goes over that amount, so say it goes to 8 million, you know, who pays that difference, you know, for that extra million or so? Question number 2 was in regards to the pump houses and the Park Place wall. Jeff, I believe you mentioned that the Park Place wall was going to be built with drainage. So my question in regards to that was, is that drainage going to be tied into the storm sewer systems so that it would be evacuated? You know, or what can you speak to the drainage system there? And then my last question is about the repair and replace. And so in one of the last 2 years, I've watched a lot of meetings and I'm not sure which one it was, but in the last 2 years, there was something where someone mentioned that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a program that in the event that the wall fails or needs a major repair, that they come out and do that. And I was hoping that Jeff could speak to that maybe, because from what I understand, the village does maintain it, and that's the $15,000 budget for that. But you know, if there's a major repair or a section of the wall has to be replaced, or, you know, I don't know what kind of damage can happen in these flood events, but maybe a huge tree goes on the river and, you know, hits something. And that's it. Those are my 4 questions.
Okay, so a lot of the earlier questions that were asked by the prior 3 speakers are going to be addressed later, but these are very discrete. So Mr. Zerker, if I can impose upon you, let's just run through the questions that Ms. Coombs had. The first one pertained to the possibility of losing the funding and what would happen if we did.
Yeah, so in this case, so Governor Pritzker is in charge of the state of Illinois' budget, and so any rollbacks that he would be enacting would not impact this project in particular. With the idea of us continuing to pause this project and keep it on hold, I'll be required to show that we will be not spending the money that has been given to us by the federal government, which does put the money at risk for possibility of the Corps of Engineers sweeping that money up and taking it away from us for a time. In this case, it would be whatever we would show as not being used during this fiscal year, and we would expect that money to then be replaced in the future when we show that we could then use it. It just is a risk that if we continue to show that we're not moving forward and not doing work on it, that we would possibly lose the funds for a time. Again, there's no guarantee of when that would come back, hopefully the next fiscal year, but we would have to get in line again and obtain those funds. So as far as it is a possibility, not guaranteed either direction. So it could happen. The budget difference, who pays, if the budget goes up, we will coordinate with the Village of Riverside as well as MWRD. I don't know what MWRD's full commitment is in the language they did with the Village of Riverside. Any difference between the proposed budget so far would be cost shared 65-35. The only hard limit we have is that the federal government cannot spend more than $10 million total. We're well under that. The current federal budget is around 5 million, so we have quite some room before we get there. And we would definitely coordinate any budget increases with the village and MWRD, so you would know about it in advance.
Thank you.
So do you have the other ones, Jeff?
Yeah, so then you're talking about the pumps and then if there's an issue with those being damaged. Wait, hold on. Let me get back to this. All right, so the pumps, those are, Well,
Yeah, I think that, Jeff, I think the question went to, you had mentioned you were going to install drainage along the park
right.
wall. And does that drainage tie into the pump system?
Yeah, so it depends on which side of the wall that you're talking about. If you're talking about the dry side of the wall, all the drainage on the dry side of the wall would be definitely tied into the pump stations itself so that the water would not accumulate on the back side of the wall. The drainage on the side of the wall that has river water up against it would just be draining back towards the river itself. It would not interact with the pump stations. We wouldn't want to be bringing water from the wet side over to the dry side. So for instance, along Park Place, there would be a drainage swale that would be input there that would also have some type of drainage tile in it that would allow water that would accumulate on the back side of the wall to drain out whenever the flooding has receded enough to allow that water to drain. So it should provide for adequate drainage, not have an accumulation of water there that would continue to pond and be available for things like mosquitoes and stuff like that. And then there is as you mentioned, there is a program through the Corps of Engineers. It's PL 9985, where when the village continues to do their operation and maintenance projects properly, we inspect the wall every year with the village. As long as it passes those inspections, you are entered into this PL 9985 program. Whereas if there is a catastrophic storm event, something happens to the wall, Congress has appropriated dollars for the Corps of Engineers to come in and fix those projects on that basis. If something were to occur during a large storm event, normal everyday wear and tear or something happens to the wall or the pump stations on their own would be up to the Village of Riverside to repair on their own. But we do have disaster funds that are allocated for repairs that happen during storm events or major emergency events like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
I
you.
think that covers it all.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Stack, I don't think you were here with us when I made an earlier announcement. I think you did want to address the board. So if you could unmute yourself, I'll call upon you next. You're still quiet, Paul. You need to unmute.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little more focused on my comments, and I'm concerned with the bridge on Forest Avenue. I would like everybody to, when they have a chance, to watch a short video, which is on YouTube. And to go to YouTube, simply type in Riverside 2013 and flooding. It's about a 3-minute video. I don't know who took it. I don't know who narrates it. But it shows pretty graphically what my concern is. That bridge was built, for reasons I don't understand, far too shallow to the river. And when the river floods, and particularly when debris comes down the river, the bridge ends up as a giant beaver dam. It blocks it up. I've seen that repeatedly. I've seen it during my term as presidency, and I suspect you have too with your term during presidency. We've got to go out there and inspect the flooding. And there is all the branches and vegetation and so forth jammed into and underneath that bridge. Why that bridge was constructed so low to the water, I have no idea, but it's a fact. Now, if the retaining wall is built, the water is going to, as it rises, the water is going to go primarily to the west. It's going to go into the Forest Preserve District, but it also goes over First Avenue, and it goes onto RB's property. Now, part of RB is in a floodplain, and RB has had flooding from the river before. So that if we end up creating a flood problem for RB, there may become an obligation on our part to mitigate it. And I'm not sure how that's done. But at any point, I'm really concerned about the bridge. You know, the cost of replacing the bridge would be huge. I mean, it'd be a couple $1 million. And so the question is, what do we do about it? I don't understand. I tried going through the Army Corps' report, seeing if anybody looked at that bridge and said, hey, there's a real issue here, and I can't find it. particularly now because they've taken dams and everything else all along the Des Plaines River. What happens in a flood is all of this debris that comes during a heavy rainstorm, large branches, shrubs, you name it, comes crashing down, and we're the only dam there, this bridge. So I would be really reluctant to think that this is a good idea unless the Army Corps actually studies the whole issue of the bridge. I just don't know how you get around that. There's no way of mitigating the bridge itself. You literally have to take the bridge out and make it a higher bridge. And you know, it was put in probably about 28, 30 years ago, but it has been a cause of real flood problem. The floods on the, particularly RB, we never had floods at RB when the bridge came in, and we're starting to get them now. And I'm a real concern about it. So my concerns are very focused. And I think when everybody looks at this video that I've made reference to it, again, it's Riverside 2013 flooding. It's only about a 2 or 3 minute. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So other than that, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Stack. I appreciate it. Always good to see you, sir.
It's good seeing you.
Mr. Durbin, you're up.
Yes, thank you. We had sent an email that we wanted to have read out loud, and I'm going to read that now. Dear President Sells, Village Trustees, Village Manager Francis, and Executive Secretary Haley. We are writing to ask that you postpone the vote going forward with the Groveland Avenue Levee project. We want to see flood relief for residents of Riverside. Yet, as homeowners with the property on Maplewood Road backing up to Park, we have many questions about how the wall behind our property will affect us, our flood risk, and our property. After watching the presentation a few Thursdays ago, we got a clear view of what the levee wall will look like on West, but not what it will be like on Groveland. This is a big change to the landscape, look and feel of the back of our property, which is full of trees, and it sounds like many would have to be cut down. We are wondering what, if any.
Mr. Durbin?
Yes.
Can I ask you to pause just a second? So,
of course.
So we were planning on reading your letter, everybody, but this issue has come up a few times now. So maybe, especially, it's kind of in conjunction with what Mr. Zerker was just saying. We went out and we measured at Park Place where the placement of the wall is going to be. The wall is going to be placed close enough to the parking spots on Park Place that there will be no impingement into private property for any of the homes on Maplewood that back up to Park Place. So there will be no impact on your backyard. So there will be no tree removals. There will have nothing to do with any of the buildings or properties that are back there. So to the degree that that's one of your concerns, that is not going to happen. The wall will be far enough, if it's constructed, the wall will be far enough from the fence line that the easement would not affect your property. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think that's a big part of your concern. I just wanted to explain that.
It was a big part, and thank you. We appreciate that. If it is still going to, I'm sorry, I misunderstood earlier and thought maybe you guys had moved on from that. But if it's going to be read, I will refrain from that and let you stick to your original agenda.
No, that's okay. If you want to finish reading it, that's fine.
Okay.
And what you think we were ignoring you. We have a stack of them we're going to read.
Oh, okay. Totally understand. No, thank you for that. You know, so that's a wonderful assurance, and we appreciate that. And glad that these minutes will capture that. So, I mean, we're still curious about how high the wall will be behind our house, though. You know, how much we'll be looking at, where it's right now we're looking at, you know, beautiful trees. If we're looking at a high wall instead, or will our current fence hopefully get to remain and obscure the wall? We are also still concerned about the water that does flow into our backyard from river during major flooding events. We did live in Riverside during the flooding of 2013. We were not in this particular residence at the time, so we haven't seen that firsthand. However, our neighbors did share pictures and video of the river running through our backyard, up to sandbags at what is now our back steps and basement. Our concern is that even a small change in the amount of water coming through our backyards could certainly mean now water in our house. And again, we obviously want to see a solution to the flooding that Groveland, West Lincoln, and Forest, et cetera, experience. We're still concerned about the risk of our street, or frankly others, across First Avenue and so forth becoming a potential new flood zone. And we know the modeling shows that that is not supposed to happen, but because of historical reasons also mentioned previously, we are concerned that that still could be the case. We just really want to think about whether this is truly the best plan. And we really want to have as many answers as possible to assure others outside of current floodplains that we understand full scope and impact of the project. The only other thing I wanted to tack on to that is that I know we on Maplewood in that area have been a rather vocal group because of our concerns about how it will affect our property and us potentially getting negative ramifications of the wall. I do want to express appreciation to Mr. Barcati and Ms. Marsh Osga, who really don't have the same level of skin in the game that those of us on Maplewood personally do, and the amount of research that they put in as someone who may not personally be directly impacted, but still was able to raise some similar concerns that we had. So I just wanted to voice my support for their statement as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Durbin. We appreciate that. Do we have anybody else who would like to address the board before we read the public comment that was sent in? And we are going to go back and go through the questions that have been asked here. So, but we want to get all the public comment in first so the trustees can kind of take it all at one swoop. Okay, so hearing none, I'll ask Manager Francis if you've got a little cup of water there so you can get through your reading tonight.
Yes. President Sells and trustees, allow me to once again voice my opposition to the Groveland West Levee project and request you to vote no, terminate this project. This project destroys value for the village and at its best merely shifts burden from one property owner to another. At minimum, I would propose the vote and if necessary, move forward differently for these reasons. The residents have not had an opportunity for public hearings on the topic as committed to by the village. Given the magnitude and impact of this project, a specifically designated meeting, be it virtual or face-to-face, should have been held with adequate advance and widespread notification. The lack of clarity and transparency of all the data and decisions that address all aspects of this project. A project of this size and cost should have clear project management from the perspective of village management, government, and residents as stakeholders and not rely only on slide decks from the Army Corps of Engineers. There is no clear document or support package that outlines all issues, concerns, finances, economics, and data used to reach any decision about the project from the onset. Instead, residents are left to sift through old documents, emails, landmark articles, village trustee minutes, and videos. Every time the topic of the levy arises, there are more questions of data accuracy, data being excluded, and data that contradicts other data. This weakness of this part of the project alone is enough to warrant not moving forward until all parties have clear and consistent knowledge and access to the basis on which any decision is made. Having been involved with numerous major projects in the business and government sector, I am surprised about how all the basic rules have project management have not been used for such a significant project to the village and residents. The narrow economic focus and benefit of the project. Key to this are the project is driven by the Army Corps of Engineers' ability to secure funding for the levee and not to address the totality of funding or flooding in the village upstream or downstream of the Groveland West area. The project is dependent upon the village infrastructure, sewers, to address any pooling of water. The inadequacy of the village sewer system to handle significant rainfall, let alone flooding, is already well known. Furthermore, we are dependent upon the water reclamation authorities to allows us to release our water. This total impact of this has not been addressed by any of the economics for the project. This project does not eliminate the burden of carrying flood insurance and has not eliminated the opportunity to make FEMA claims due to flooding. Nowhere has it been made public as to the ongoing costs of maintaining the levee and supporting infrastructure to the village. No other alternatives have been discussed. For complete transparency, I am a resident who resides on Maplewood on the west side with my backyard on the river. We have been severely impacted by flooding and rainwater issues and have suffered economic loss due to flooding. I have and can continue to provide photos to support the impact on our home and property. At our own expense, we have mitigated our damage and continue to seek improvements to address flooding issues. I believe I will be impacted by the building of the wall. More important, I would rather see public funds used in a manner that benefits all residents rather than shifting burden. I would like to see an improvement in our village infrastructure that addresses significant rainfall and flooding issues for all residents. Regards, Anna Montes. Dear trustees, our family has lived on Maplewood for 29 years. We have been involved in every iteration of the on-again, off-again levee projects over many years. Below are some questions and concerns we have regarding the latest proposed levee. At the meeting on December 3rd, a resident from Lincoln, David Linetsky, questioned whether the east-west portion of the levee would stop the flow of water from Maplewood. His question reinforces a fact many have stated in past meetings. Floodwater flows across the yards on the south end of Maplewood, and the water currently flows south to Park Avenue. If the proposed levee is constructed, the water will accumulate in those yards and potentially spill into the Maplewood sewers. When the sewers fill up, the water goes right into our basement. What is the plan to address the trapped floodwater, rainwater, groundwater on Maplewood? Is there a pumping station plan for Maplewood? If not, should there be? We feel all Riverside residents should have a realistic understanding of the change in landscape prior to proceeding to the next step in the project. In the interest of full transparency, before you vote, would you instruct Army Corps of Engineers to mark with spray paint the 34-ish feet, 15 feet on either side of the levee, the width of the levee and its foundation, of trees and bushes that are mandated to be cleared along the north and south, east and west legs of the levee? Jeff Zerker stated that the east-west portion of the levee would be built in green space just north of the parking spaces on Park Place. Would Army Corps of Engineers mark that location as well? What is the determination of garages, sheds, and fences for properties on the south end of Maplewood? Jeff Zerker has stated the flood water will not negatively impact properties north and west of the proposed levee. The Army Corps of Engineer model shows no measurable increase of flood water north and west of the levee. The expected water surface elevation will be raised about 0.04 inches. What is the recourse for those living upstream if the models are not accurate? Will the Army Corps of Engineers indemnify those properties? My confidence in the proposed levee project was eroded when my friends and I were speaking to the Army Corps of Engineers employees who were surveying the area. After showing them where we lived in relation to the proposed levee, we explained that we were concerned that the levee may create a situation that would cause us to flood. A man chuckled as he responded, "Yeah, you're right, it might." As a resident who sought out property that was not in floodplain, we take our property value seriously, just as you do. We do not wish to risk our property value being negatively impacted by this project. Everyone would like to see an end to flooding in Riverside. No one wants to see our neighbors suffer and be displaced. Unfortunately, those residents living in the floodplain will still have inadequate protection in the eyes of FEMA and will need to continue to purchase expensive flood insurance. Further, property values will significantly decrease for homeowners who will have the levee wall in their backyards. Based on our research of the upstream impact of levees, RB High School and Maplewood Road will very likely experience a new pattern of flooding. The project should not benefit one area of Riverside currently in the floodplain while potentially creating a new problem. We urge you to vote no to moving forward with the project until these details can be properly explored. There's too much at stake if we get this wrong. Sincerely, Colleen and Dean Toriomi. I do apologize if I pronounce anybody's last name incorrectly. Dear neighbors, Bernard and Lee Snyder purchased their dream home at 153 Maplewood Road in 1957. Someone in the Snyder family has continually lived in this house for 63 years. This was my childhood home. My friends and I spent countless hours playing in the park behind our home. The park stretched down the north side of Park Place. The native trees and plants were lovingly maintained by the village until the village ripped out the 100-year-old trees and built parking spots for both village residents and for the village coffers. According to my mother, there was no backyard ponding on Maplewood until the village removed the park. There was no place for the runoff to go but our yards. My husband and I attempted to install drainage pipes in order to rectify the problem, but the village made us remove them because water was draining to Park Place. Now the village wants to install a wall along Park Place. My family and I are very concerned. Does this mean that the occasional ponding that we have on Maplewood will result in flooding? Will the village take responsibility for this flooding if it happens? Will the village be using eminent domain to take our properties in order to build this tieback behind our homes? Is the village going to tear out the flowers that my mother planted, the young maple trees that my husband planted, or the 100-year-old oaks in my backyard? Is this wall really going to help anyone in the long run? Could this money be used in a better way by updating the Riverside street and sewer drainage? Could the money be better spent by keeping the Forest Avenue Bridge Foundation clear of the rubbish that builds up throughout the year? We are wondering why the village has decided to proceed with this project without contact with residents on South Maplewood. The last I heard, the village had decided a couple of years ago to disregard this project. Now it sounds like full steam ahead. What happened? Is it true that you have a timeline to set up construction and that it is now? Does our input not count in the decision to proceed with the project? My family, as well as many Maplewood residents, hope that the Village of Riverside will reconsider their decision to proceed with this project. This has been written from the heart. Thank you. Most sincerely, Alex and Carol Snyder du Sassoy. If you truly believe the levy is in the best interest of the village, you should care about FEMA. Why spend $7 million on a structure that will not be granted FEMA accreditation nor provide insurance relief? According to FEMA, an accredited levy structure shall be treated as if it does not exist for risk mapping and the NFIP National Flood Insurance Program, according to what I have read. There are real consequences for getting this wrong, especially for the very people you are trying to protect. This is why you need to do a FEMA analysis before agreeing to move forward. President Sells promised a FEMA analysis would be needed before agreeing to move forward. This was on November 21st, 2019. I haven't heard this has taken place. If not, why not? You must also know the village is allowed to spend some of the dollars tied to the design phase to hire their own consultants for certain things related to design. I have no doubt a FEMA analysis would qualify. Everyone suspects the current levee design already misses the mark per FEMA regulation. We know that Illinois Bulletin 75 predicts higher 100-year flood levels. The best due diligence is to have FEMA weigh in now. The residents of Riverside deserve this to be done. I suggest you reach out to Mr. Frank Shockey, Senior Natural Hazard Specialist at FEMA for the Chicago area. I spoke to Frank over a year ago and he indicated willingness to help. If the village asks, I trust he will. Again, the residents as well as the village board deserve a clear information before making a binding decision that all Riversiders may very well live to regret. Most sincerely, Peter Schoenman. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, the Groveland Avenue Berm project represents a dramatic change to the historic Village of Riverside that will have multi-generational consequences. We urge you to obtain additional information before voting to approve the design process for this major project. Please consider the following issues: maintenance and village liability. It is our understanding that while funding for the initial implementation of the wall is provided by federal and other sources, Riverside will be obligated to pay for the design if the village chooses to reject the project after the design is complete. If so, that creates a contingent liability in the range of $250,000 to $500,000. Essentially, a vote to move forward with a design phase is a vote to approve the project in its entirety because withdrawal would be cost prohibitively expensive. At this stage, we feel that the design is so incomplete and so many questions remain unanswered that it would be imprudent to approve the project. For example, we understand that the village will assume maintenance and liability for the wall. The latest estimate we have seen is $15,000 per year. How was this amount determined? Has it been updated since 2015? How does the maintenance cost escalate as the levee ages? Who is involved in the annual inspections in addition to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? And what recourse does the village have in responding to inspection points? Does the maintenance cost include additional insurance for liability issues? Has the village reviewed the levee owner's manual published by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? There are chapters on erosion, encroachments, removal of debris, vegetation, animal control, under seepage, and more. Does the village have existing expertise to perform these functions? Do these structures, such as permittable landscaping, comply with our historic status? NEPA 106 process. A huge advantage of being a National Historic Landmark is the ability to collaborate with the National Environmental Policy Act and the State Historic Preservation Office. The NEPA 106 process required in this effort is designed to help landmark properties retain their unique qualities. We are not aware of the NEPA 106 collaboration with appropriate Riverside entities nor documentation of the same. The State Historic Preservation Office has as its singular focus the protection of landmarks. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does not have this as a main mission. The State Historic Preservation Office might help with further negotiations about aesthetics of flood wall. Neither the brutalist style of sheer concrete wall or the cookie cutter stamped wall aesthetic are appropriate for a village that stakes its landmark status on naturalistic designs. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sketch shown above and the first impression of Riverside for visitors traveling east on Forest Avenue suggests a walled city. Who will clean the inevitable graffiti that will adorn the walls and welcome visitors and residents alike? Exploration and negotiation of alternatives. Through the NEPA process, better focused negotiations among stakeholders who may entertain alternative solutions, e.g. the railroad landholders along the river watershed who might be willing to sell land for wetlands can be convened. Documentation of natural conservation solutions. The trend in climate science, for reasons of practicality and efficacy, is to adopt natural conservation solutions, e.g. wetland or temporary flood structures instead of human-built features. Can the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers elaborate with more specific on which natural conservation solutions they pursued and with what vigor? Resident input. The flood wall has been in discussion for several years. However, there have been only 2 public presentations from the Army Corps of Engineers offering a conceptual design for the project, April 5th, 2018 and December 3rd, 2020. Several questions arose from the April meeting and have not, to our understanding, been resolved. The December presentation appeared on the Village Board of Trustees agenda after a quiescent period of almost a year in the midst of a pandemic. Furthermore, it would appear that several of the questions and suggestions from the Preservation Commission minutes dating to 2018 have not been addressed, e.g. relating to design alternatives and functionality of proposed design. For such a significant project, 2 presentations of about 10 slides, each showing high-level sketches, does not describe the full implications of the project. Please consider a more concerted effort to comprehensively inform residents, mailing to each household that would include views of the proposed wall, description of the costs and benefits and timetable, discussion of how vigorously other alternatives were pursued, and even a referendum with the April election. Significantly greater public discussion and design schematics were prepared for the downtown enhancement changes, much more ephemeral than a flood wall. Don't we need a rigorously pursue options for a multi-generational fixture? We sympathize with residents whose properties are directly affected by flooding and listen to their comments pro and con at the 2 town halls. All village residents, however, will live with this flood wall, and communication should be improved to ensure that all residents understand the impact of the same. A positive vote today to proceed with the design phase is essentially a vote for full project implementation. A project of this magnitude that will impact Riverside for generations, both financially and with great impact to our landmark status, calls for an extraordinary effort to garner public input and peer review. Thank you for your consideration and for the considerable time you volunteer on the village's behalf. Respectfully, Mike and Kathy Maloney. Dear Riverside Village Trustees, I have lived in Riverside since 1985 and have witnessed what the Des Plaines River could do on several occasions. Ray, my husband, has lived here since 1980. I have resided on Maplewood Road since 1991. Maplewood has been one of the blessings of my life. I have always been proud of our wonderful neighbors, young and older alike. We have helped each other deal with and recover from rain and flood events. It is with this fondness that I do not want to see harm come to any of their or my property because of the proposed Groveland Levee project. I wish there was a good solution to the flooding that occurs in the floodplain area of the Groveland neighborhood. There needs to be a solution without incurring new harm and expense to the north area of the proposed tieback along Park. I propose delaying the vote that is scheduled on December 17th. Wait until all the questions are clearly answered, or vote no to continue with the project. Many of the concerns and questions that were posed at previous meetings have not been clearly addressed. There was photo evidence presented from us to show how the river came right up to the homes on Maplewood Road, very close to the bottom of the bridge. Or I'm sorry, came right up to our homes on Maplewood Road and right up to the bottom of the Forest Avenue Bridge. The opening photo of the presentation shows the river very close to the bottom of the bridge. It was denied that this occurred by the Army Corps at past meetings. This is important information that shows that many Maplewood residents are already on the knife edge of the river, entering their homes or entering the street and sewer system. It wouldn't take much more rainfall for the river to end up butting up against the Forest Avenue Bridge. It isn't calm, peaceful water. It has much velocity and force. How does it change the model? Where are the models of when the water exceeds the bottom of the bridge? Another question was, how is the water from rainfall directly in the region figured into the model? I believe Mr. Zerker said it is not figured into the model. Many of the folks on Maplewood have spent unplanned money for dealing with the water from both the river and excessive groundwater and pooling. What effect would adding the rainfall have on the model? I was surprised that there wasn't more information provided at the meeting. There was no discussion or visuals of the Groveland portion of the levee. Would the entire length be denuded of trees? What is the exact measurement for the base of the levee? 15 feet on either side, and how wide is the center? 35 feet total. It would be helpful to provide visual of how it would look driving into town from Forest Avenue. Photos of the gate types with clear instructions on use. Is there a bigger pumping station than the one proposed for on West for Groveland? How much more money would it cost if needed? If needed, what does it look like? How much more money would be needed for generators to power the pumps? What if pumps prove ineffective? Recourse and additional cost of generator maintenance. What about graffiti? Is that a problem in other locations? Another question is, at the height of the flooding river, does the tieback turn into a dam for the folks living on Maplewood? Is there a river height that is actually worse for Maplewood neighborhood than if the tieback was not present, effectively helping Groveland, but making water back up behind the tieback? The Army Corps keep referencing a 100-year event. I believe we have experienced a 100-year event, if not more than once. If it is not a far reach to believe there will be higher events well before 100 years into the future, it would be helpful to watch the modeling with and without the tieback in place to higher than 100-year events. I thought the computer was not running the Army Corps program properly when at a past meeting. Another question was about the tieback on Park. Where is it going to be placed exactly? Could they actually show us? Will there have to be land acquisition from Maplewood property owners? Who will decide what to pay them if needed, and how fair will that be? Will Park be denuded of trees up to the existing fences? Will it mean cutting trees down in backyards? Will the parking spaces along the road be sacrificed during a flood event? Will the river water velocity churn up the yards and landscaping of Maplewood residents? The river has knocked down fences there in the past. What about having no south exit through the fences of their properties? That is a loss as well. There are apartment buildings behind them that the trees act as natural screens to direct line of vision into their houses. How would taxes be affected in both neighborhoods? Potential for higher taxes in the Groveland neighborhood and or lower taxes for the Maplewood neighborhood. Early on, West Avenue residents were told they would be able to access the river from their property. There was to be some type of way to get over the wall with their canoes and such. What happened to that? Have the various committees in Riverside been involved for consultation, such as the Preservation Commission? There is more and more being said about properties upstream from these types of levee projects. There is evidence that there is a downside to residing upriver. I believe there have been some studies presented to the board several years back. Many residents are unhappy with the Swan Pond project and how it turned out. It just goes to show that modeling is not as exact as it makes out to be. There was a mention during this most current meeting of sandbagging. I have enclosed a not so great diagram which addresses the sandbagging at the end of park means. It literally would be impossible to build the tie back to 619 feet. It would extend way, way east. This is because of the elevation of land. So because of that, there would have to be sandbagging in the area around Kimbark and Woodside. So that means the water from the river has sufficiently backed up onto Maplewood properties and to have to sandbag that far east. I see a big problem with this type of thinking. It is illogical to think Maplewood properties will not be affected by the tieback. We do not know what the height of the future flood events will be. Again, they might be higher than the past 100-year events. It appears to be save the Groveland floodplain area at the expense of the Maplewood area. The Groveland neighborhood, the village trustees and the Army Corps are asking for a major sacrifice and risk from the people to the north of the project and the entire village. Also the character of the look of the village. What recourse will we have if the project creates new problems? Is the answer, oh, well, we tried, thus leaving the loss for someone else? I want you to ask yourself if you would be concerned living on the other side of the wall, the one where water is traveling toward you and with so many obstacles downriver from your home. Would you be concerned about your property holding its potential value, not to mention the other problems associated with unwanted water and the change of the character of your property? I admit that this is a long letter. Thank you for taking the time to read it. This is very important to get right. It has the appearance of taking one problem and moving to somewhere else. Sincerely, Monica Monaredo. That is it.
Thank you, Manager Francis. Would anyone else like to address the board? Okay, so before I turn it over to Mr. Burns, please.
Yes. I would like to just identify the Army Corps has the quote from what is this? The document, Jeffrey, your document states in very small print on both documents in both presentations that the views, opinions, and findings contained in this report are those of the authors and should not be construed as on an official Department of Army position, policy, or decision, unless so designated by other official documents. I don't know if those other documents are around. I have not seen them. So this is not an Army Corps document. Is that correct? That's a question.
The requirement for that statement is a legal requirement that we were required to put on all of our presentations that are put in public. It is an Army Corps of Engineers document, but it is backed up by our findings in the official document for the Upper Des Plaines project.
It's only there for legal reasons. It is an Army document?
Correct.
Then it should indicate so. But okay, so I wanted to be very clear. We are completely against this. We hope you guys vote. We hope you vote no. It's the right thing to do, and that's our statement. It's tragic that it's not getting the support that should be there, because you do not have the necessary information. There's been so much information that has come to you and with a heads up, and what happened in Swan Pond is an indication of what can happen when something is done and done wrong by the Corps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. what I'm going to do now is I had an opportunity to get the documents that Manager Francis just read. I've tried to pull out, there were a lot of, as you heard, there were a lot of questions that were asked over and over, and there were subsidiary questions. So I've tried to go through and pull out the most salient questions and provide at least my answer to them. And I'll ask Mr. Zerker and Mr. Gailey if as I go along here, if I'm getting something wrong, please jump in and correct it. So I just want to run through these real quickly, and then we can pick up some of the ones that were asked during verbal public comment. First is the claim that there hasn't been enough opportunity for public hearings. I've been working on this project for the last 8 years, and in the last 2 years alone, this is the 9th village board meeting that we have had to discuss this project. And there has been public comment, extensive public comment at each of those meetings. The project does not eliminate the need for flood insurance. That is true, but the reason it doesn't eliminate the need for flood insurance is because we're not able to tie into an elevation high enough to meet the requirements for FEMA to get out of the floodplain. But that has absolutely nothing to do with the effectiveness of the project or the need for the project. Ongoing costs of maintenance have not been made public. They've been made public since 2015. The annual estimated cost is $15,000. And included in that amount is actually a lot of soft costs that would be able to be met by village staff, because a lot of it has to do with inspections and expenditures from personnel. That also includes an annualized amount set aside for the purchase of replacing pumps and other maintenance. The Park Place wall will trap water and raise level in the backyards on Maplewood that back up to the wall. This has been a main concern for the folks over on Maplewood, and one that we've taken very seriously from the very beginning. The answer is that, first of all, the Park Place wall will not trap water. The flood wall nor the berm are dams. So the flood levels in Maplewood backyards will not be affected by either the flood walls or the berm. Second, as was mentioned earlier, given where the placement of the wall is going to be on Park Place, the grading that is done behind the wall between the flood wall, which is which will be about 18 inches wide, 18 inches thick, that grading will actually improve the drainage of the backyards that back up to Park Place off of Maplewood. Can we visually mark off where the 15-foot buffer would be on each side of the wall? The answer is yes, and that is something that will be done if the design phase is approved. The exact location and the height will be demonstrated either by running string or by putting up a cardboard mock-up, so people would be able to see exactly where the wall would be and how it would be viewed from various standpoints. That goes to Mr. Durbin's concern about how much would he see over his fence. The likely answer for the folks that back up to Park Place is, if you have a wooden fence in your backyard now, you likely would not see this wall at all. If you did, it would be a very small amount of the wall. So that is something that would be done. What effect will the Park Place flood wall have on existing trees, vegetation, or buildings in the backyards of homes on Maplewood that back up to Park Place? I addressed this earlier. Given the placement of the wall on Park Place, the easement will not impinge on private property, so it will have no effect. This next one is probably the biggest concern that has flowed through many of the comments you've heard tonight and also in the past years. And the question is, will the project increase flooding on Maplewood? And the answer is that the project will not increase flooding anywhere. The Army Corps of Engineers is not allowed to construct a project that will increase flooding in any other location. So the modeling that they have done that has been confirmed by our village engineer, Christopher B. Burke, shows that there will be no increase in flooding upstream, downstream, or to the west. It will have no impact on flooding whatsoever. And really, you don't even need modeling to understand that concept, because basically what is happening is the water that we're talking about, although it seems like a great amount to us because we see the catastrophic impact it has on the folks on West and Pine and on Groveland and on Lincoln. It seems like a lot of water to us, but in terms of the amount of water that's actually flowing through the river during a flood event, it's a very, very small amount, and it's still water. So basically, when the berm or the flood walls are built, the only thing that happens is that water is not allowed to flow into the depression, and it simply flows downstream. So it will have no effect on the height of the river. And that's, like I said, that's been verified by the modeling, both by the Army Corps and our engineers. Why should we build this project if it can't be accredited by FEMA? The FEMA accreditation only has to do with whether or not people can get out of a floodplain and not need flood insurance. And because we can't reach the 619 level that would be required to receive FEMA accreditation, we can't meet the FEMA standards. However, that does not change the fact that this project would still protect 111 structures. 111 structures are within this depressed bowl that we're talking about, and that comprises 273 households. So that is the effect of the project. Next up is, will a Section 106 evaluation regarding possible adverse effects on historic researches be done as part of this project? The answer is yes, it will be. It's not clear, as Ms. Marshazga pointed out, it's not clear from the documentation we currently have whether this specific item was considered when the Army Corps did its first evaluation. We're trying to find that out, whether specific attention was given to Riverside's national landmark status. If we cannot find clear, convincing evidence of that, the village will request a separate and thorough 106 review, and the Army Corps has agreed to do that. And it's during that period of time that the more extensive public input that has been asked about will take place. You know, if I can just say something more generally for a second, a lot of this has been a chicken and the egg problem. You know, a lot of the things that people are asking to see can't be shown until we enter the design phase of the project. And we can't enter the design phase of the project until we authorize them to move forward with the design phase of the project. So extensive, I mean, I can guarantee you that there's not a single person on this board or any past boards that don't have the same concerns about the aesthetics and the historical appropriateness of this wall as everyone else does. And those matters will be fully vetted, and we will reach a conclusion that is satisfactory to our village, or it won't happen. Does the design phase obligate the village to construct the project? No, it does not. The design phase decision that we're talking about tonight is merely exactly that. It's whether or not to move forward with the design phase of the project. There will be a separate vote taken after the design phase is completed, and that design phase will include, most notably, will include the 106 review that was talked about earlier. Will the project have any tax ramifications for residents? Short answer is no. It has nothing to do with taxes in Riverside. And the last question that I have is, have village commissions been involved in discussions about the project? The Preservation Commission has discussed it briefly a couple times, but they really haven't had enough detail to have a serious discussion about it. And certainly they will be one of the main stakeholders that will be included in further conversation and gathering input when we get into the design phase and the 106 review that will be necessary for the project. So that's what I have, but now I'm going to move to some of the questions that we just got tonight. I think I can answer maybe a couple of them. One was about the Burlington Railroad Bridge and the realignment of the structures there so you could have better water flow, and has that been considered? And Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that has been considered several times, and the determination has been that even though there might be some benefit to the realignment of those piers, it does not give us the protection we need, and certainly not the protection that this project would provide. Another question is about whether there would be ponding of rainwater on the east side of the wall along West Avenue. To the degree that there might be, grading will be part of this project, as will a pump station. So if there was any water that happened to collect on that side of the wall, it would be graded such that it would flow to an appropriate pump station and then pump back into the river. Jeff, I think I'm going to let you answer these two. One is the consideration that's been given to non-structural measures. And the other question is, what would happen if the pump stations become inadequate?
Yeah, so as far as non-structural is concerned, what we look for in a non-structural situation is we look for clusters of homes that are not able to be protected by a structural measure. And non-structural is kind of a misnomer, because really what we end up looking at is things like buyouts, where we would remove a home, elevations where a home would be elevated above the flood zone, or major renovations where we would flood proof the floors of the home that are impacted by flooding. In this case, we have a large number, 100 and I believe 11 structures, you said, President Sells.
Yes.
That large of a number of structures really helps qualify it for a structural measure. When we're looking at non-structural, we usually end up with a much lower number of homes that are impacted. And that's what kicks us out of a structural measure. Structural measures are expensive, especially when they extend over a large range of land. In this case, we have a relatively small confined location with a large number of structures that lends itself very well to non-structural. We do this analysis. Groveland was part of a watershed study. We started off with over 700 locations that we looked at for the possibility of doing structural and features, and that was slowly narrowed down over time based on ability to construct and impacts to overall situation, how many homes were in there included. Areas that were left with pockets of homes, we did look at non-structural, and those were included in the study at the end. Overall, non-structural is considered for all these areas. We will be assisting the village with emergency evacuation as well as flood warning systems to be included as part of this. So they will have all the information they need in terms of that. So that is a portion of non-structural as well. As far as the pump stations are concerned, we will do extensive calculations on ensuring that the rain events that would possibly incur during the life of this levee would be covered by the pump stations. We cannot guarantee that the pump station will handle every single rain event. I've seen too many large rain events to guarantee that. We build them to the best efficiency possible and work with the village to make sure that that will adequately handle what needs to be handled.
So kind of following up along the non-structural idea is, and I think you addressed this before also, Mr. Zerker, is the notion of wetlands or other natural conservation measures. I believe you've told us in the past that we just simply don't have enough acreage to make something like that feasible.
Yeah, so similar to the 700 sites that we looked at for structural measures, we had almost 1,000 different locations throughout the watershed that we looked at for reintroducing native species and making natural landscapes available. Over the course of a 13-year study, we narrowed that down to 7 sites that were chosen. We do not have a way of being able to measure how much water that will hold or remove from the watershed itself. We know that it's a positive benefit, but we can't measure it and say that it will actually have flood benefits. So we can't program for that type of thing and say that you will definitely be removed from the floodplain. There's just no calculation available to do that. The only thing we have is flood storage and flood walls that we can say for sure that we'll be able to remove someone from flooding at this point in time.
And then the last one I have here is from Mr. Stack. Would you like to comment on the situation with the Forest Avenue Bridge?
Yeah, so with the Forest Avenue Bridge, we definitely appreciate the fact that bridges are one of the restrictors that cause issues in a river. In our modeling at this point in time for the 100-year flood, the Forest Avenue Bridge does not seem to be a restriction on the flows. That's based on information I got from my hydraulic engineers. They seem to indicate that that is not a restriction that causes increased flow up, any backup or anything like that. We would encourage the village to continue to work with Metropolitan Water Reclamation District to remove debris as it collects. If it's allowed to collect for multiple events, it can cause problems, as Mr. Stack noted, and we would encourage you to continue to work on that. We also would encourage the village to continue to advocate for when that bridge is replaced, that it be raised to a certain extent to ensure that further capacity is available underneath of it. We do not discourage the village from doing any of those types of things as they continue to work with the various agencies that work within the village limits. We think that that is a wise move on the village part to keep an eye on those things and to continue to advocate for updated structures that are placed in the area that impacts the village.
So I just got a note here, Manager Francis, did you have something else you needed to read for us?
Yes, I have one other public comment that was sent via email that I overlooked reading. Dear Riverside Board President and Trustees, my name is Kathy Flaherty. Our family has lived in Riverside on Maplewood Road since 1985. We do not live on the riverside of Maplewood, but on the east side of the street. We are very concerned about the Groveland West Park Levee project the village board is considering. Through the 35 years living on Maplewood Road, we have experienced numerous floods. We have had to sandbag on our neighbor's property across the street to prevent the Des Plaines River from going into the street and into the sewer system, which would cause our basements to flood. As of now, our property is not on a floodplain. If the Groveland West Park levee is constructed, we believe flooding on Maplewood would increase and we would have to obtain expensive flood insurance. That belief is backed by studies that report flooding upstream from a levee increases when levees are built. See the studies posted by Monica Monteredo. It does not make sense to protect one area of Riverside from flooding if that will cause another area to experience flooding. We are also very concerned about how the Groveland West Park levee will look. It will be very disconcerting to see these concrete levees as you enter into our beautiful village, especially to people who are coming into Riverside for the first time. How awful to be a property owner on West and on Maplewood, whose property backs up to park. Their view and the beautiful trees and vegetation will be all gone. All that is left is an ugly concrete wall. This is not what Riverside is known for. The residents on Maplewood were very surprised that the Groveland West Park levee was discussed at the village board on December 3rd. Many Maplewood residents have attended the village board meetings in the past 2.5 years when the levee was being discussed, so we were disappointed that we had not been notified of the meeting. Please vote no on this Groveland West Park project, or at least consider delaying the vote on December 17th, which is 1 week before Christmas, until further discussion can take place. We appreciate the time and commitment you devote to Riverside. Thank you, Kathy and John Flaherty.
Thank you, Manager Francis. And hopefully the Flaherty's concerns have been answered here this evening by what we've been talking about. Before we move on to the trustees, are there any other questions from any of the residents who are with us tonight? Okay, hearing none, then what I would ask for.
Oh, this is David, if it's all right, President.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Barcati.
I know there's been questions that have been asked sort of along this line. I guess my question is, what, if anything, will the Village of Riverside do for residents who could be affected negatively by this flood wall? Specifically, will there be compensation to those properties that are not currently affected by floodwaters, but might be if this model is wrong?
Ms. Francis, do you want to take a shot at that with regard to Irma?
If you may restate the question, it sounded like you were asking if there is financial compensation for those that don't experience flooding currently.
No, the question is what happens if the model's wrong? What happens if in fact, for some reason, there was increased flooding upstream and it could be tied to the presence of the project? Is there some way that those residents would be compensated? Did I get that right, Mr. Barcati?
Correct. Thank you. Yes.
I think that is more of a question for corporate counsel from a legal perspective as it relates to contractual obligations versus our liability coverage through Irma.
Mr. Molina, are you with us? You want to take a shot at
Yeah, hang on, I am. Let me click back here. Okay, so the question there would be a property damage type question. And the property owner would likely file some sort of a lawsuit claiming either a property damage type claim or a takings type claim or partial takings type claim. And the defense of that, if it was related to damages, would be covered by the village's insurer. If it were a taking sort of claim, it would not be likely covered by that, but those involve sort of complex coverage issues. As far as the merits of the claim, I mean, that's a complex area. The Supreme Court has takings cases that are pretty elaborate. And in this case, where an effort was taken to mitigate flooding, if there was some error, there would be various defenses to that. You'd have to really see exactly what the damage was, how it was claimed, how provable it was to relate to the installation of this wall. And there'd be a lot of expert testimony involved in that, I would think. And it might not all agree, which is usually the case. So very complicated question. But everything the village does that tries to improve things are undoubtedly going to be viewed as potentially harmful by those that don't support it. So it's a sort of an unavoidable situation to some extent. I don't know if I answered it, but I tried to.
No, I appreciate that. So essentially, no, there's nothing in the works right now except a lawsuit. And then going down that path would be very complicated, obviously.
Right.
any further questions from folks who are here with us? So to get this started, then I would ask for a motion and a second to approve a resolution authorizing the commencement by the Army Corps of Engineers of the design phase of work on the Groveland Avenue Levee Section 205 Flood Risk Management Project pursuant to an existing project partnership agreement between the Department of the Army and the Village of Riverside, Illinois.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Ms. Evans. Second by, I'm sorry, who said that?
Hannon.
Oh, Mr. Hannon, sorry. There you are. You're on that side of my screen, sorry. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Trustees, it's all yours.
Ben, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question for Jeff if he's online still.
Yeah, he's with us.
When we talked about this before, there was talk about having recreational river access. Is that still in the plans to have on this levee?
Yeah, we would have to work on how we would do the cost share for that, which would require an amendment to our current project partnership agreement. We could do that and would add those features in at that point in time. And they can be part of the discussion.
Another question. How did the Army Corps determine that the Forest Avenue Bridge gate is necessary?
It all has to do with the elevation at the actual road level itself. The road level, if you're out there, is pretty much equal to the current Groveland levee height. It's about 616, and so we would need to go to the same height as the wall to provide the full protection.
Okay, now you also suggested that if we have a new bridge put in with a higher arc, would that somehow nullify the gate that you'll be putting in?
If if there was to be construction of a new bridge, normally IDOT doesn't replace bridges for a long time. There would be coordination to see if they could get rid of that feature at that point in time. Yes.
Okay. If we do have to have maintenance or fixing of this at any given time, does the village get to choose who we will contract that out, or does it have to go with whoever the Army Corps decides is best for it?
No, we would do the inspection with your crews and point out what needs to be taken care of, and you get to choose your contractor at your own choosing.
Okay. If we do go forward with this, I would like to have the Army Corps go through a punch list with village manager, full of its staff before the Army Corps leaves the site, just to make sure that there's residential input for things that could be left undone. Does that sound reasonable to you?
I didn't understand that, Alex. But can you explain that?
So when they're all said and done, in case there's something that's left undone or not to someone's specifications, that village staff go along with the Army Corps to go through the walkthrough, so we don't have something that's left undone or not taken care of properly. A punch list, just like you would if you were having someone do your home. You go through with the contract.
Yeah. So you're talking about now if we were into the construction after the construction phase.
Well, it's going to go into the contract, so I want them to kind of get a heads up on it. That's.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's.
During construction, the village would be able to be a part of any inspection that goes on and part of the final punch list review as well. That is part of their allowances as the local sponsor for the project.
Okay. That answers my questions. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Very welcome.
Mr. Gallagher. Ms. Francis?
Also, I just wanted to add certain pieces of this project, if it progresses, MWRD will also be involved because they are heavily vested financially at $2.5 million. So in our agreement with them, we have to do certain check-ins, and then they will also be as part of those inspections and things of that sort.
Further comments, discussion? Mr. Hannon?
President Sells, thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the input over email and in person. As I've told several people that I've met with about this, one of the challenges of being on the Board of Trustees is if there were easy answers, they'd be made well before these complex meetings. So there's a lot of factors here. And I think everyone taking the time to give their input is a very healthy exercise for all. Just want to clarify, and I guess maybe this is a question for President Sells. We're moving into the design phase, and there's a step after this where we go into the implementation phase, and just want to understand the level of input at the village level that's going to happen, who's going to lead that input. A lot of the comments I've gotten back are, is it going to be a straight wall? Is it possible to curve it? What will it look like? Will there be, bouldering on the riverside to make it less conspicuous, and a lot of, sort of what I'll call Riverside specific beautification features that I'm sure a lot of people will have a lot of thoughts on, and just want to get my arms around, what is that formal process between the village and Army Corps? I mean, I know it's not Army Corps draws something up, drops it on the table and says, here we are. But what, if you could walk us through what do we have?
So I'll take an initial stab at that, and then I'll ask if Mr. Zerker and Mr. Gailey can augment it. We actually were talking with Mr. Gailey about this a couple of days ago, and I spoke with Mr. Zerker about this today. Really, in my view, is if we move into the design phase, the real question is, the questions are going to be very similar to the ones that would be involved with the Section 106 concerns. The aesthetic nature of the project and its appropriateness for a particular historic setting. So I asked if our village engineer, if they could, because they have they have more resources when it comes to design and landscape architecture components with Burke than the Army Corps does. So we would enlist them to help start trying to get some actual real renderings of what this wall could look like under various iterations. I think one of the things that has thrown a lot of this conversation off is the mistaken belief by people who saw this first rendering, thinking that that's what the wall was going to look like, and it has absolutely nothing to do with what the wall is going to look like. All of those different kind of mitigation concerns can be taken into account, including landscaping on the riverside of the wall. One possibility would be if when we get into conversations with the State Historic Preservation Office, if they had concerns and they had suggestions about various mitigation options in the event they found that there was adverse effect, then of course that too would play into it, and then that would come into account in terms of like who might be paying for some of this stuff. But the goal would be to engage all the various stakeholders, including the Preservation Commission, the Landscape Advisory Commission, the same process really that was gone through with regard to the notching of the Hoffman Dam, to ensure that we get the proper input from everyone, and then as a community work toward a final design that we find is appropriate for our village. Did I get that basically right, Jeff and Orion?
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. And just one more comment. I know there's been, at least in the emails and some of the public comments that Village Manager Francis read, that because of the added cost, this is in fact a done deal. And I can only speak for myself. And quite frankly, if this, through the phase we're about to enter into, doesn't give the result that we're expecting, I think we need to take a hard look and say, notwithstanding the few dollars we have in place now, if this is not something that's going to enhance the village, create the health and safety benefits that we think it's going to, just because we're on the hook for a few dollars does not justify to me that we have no choice but to keep going, because we can't spend those dollars. So, this, I think, is where the rubber hits the road, where we see what this is actually going to look like, get input from the various constituencies, and make sure that, this objectives that we've talked about are met. The benefits are, the pump stations. That's going to have a tremendous impact. We haven't talked about the improvements to the Groveland levee. That's in various stages of needing of maintenance. That gets fixed. And then we impact these people within the bowl, and working with MWRD on improving the overall rainwater impact that's throughout the whole village. So I think there's some big shoes to fill, some big meetings, but that's why we're going through this exercise. So I appreciate everyone taking the time, and just want to be clear, if those objectives aren't being met, there's a no vote coming from me.
Yeah, if I could just reiterate that, I agree. I mean, I've served on several boards now, and no board that I have been on, and I'm quite certain that this is true of the next board. If a determination was made that this was not in the village's best interest, a couple $100,000 is not going to make a difference. So I think those concerns are unfounded. There was a claim in one of the letters that this is in essence a construction vote. That simply isn't true. Mr. Pollock.
Thank you, President Sells. There's a lot of good questions being asked. I appreciate the concerns of all the residents on both sides of this issue. I think a lot of the questions have been answered, and those that haven't been answered, we can't answer without a yes vote tonight, without moving forward to the design phase. When we get, I would reiterate what Trustee Hannon said, when we get those.
Doug, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I would reiterate what Trustee Hannon said, that when we get those answers, if we don't like them, we won't move forward. regardless of the cost. I think there's three questions here in my mind on the issue. One is the engineering, one is the aesthetics, and the third would be fairness to the property owners on West Avenue who abut the river, as they're clearly the ones most directly impacted. You know, we've had the Army Corps of Engineers design this. We've had our independent village engineer look at it, Christopher Burke Engineering, the best engineering firm in the Chicagoland area, if not the country. And they're all telling us that this will work. This is a win for everybody with no negative impacts. And based on that, you know, to this point, where we're at this point, I'm satisfied with the engineering. The aesthetics, we can't see the aesthetics without, we can't really get into the aesthetics without going to this next phase. You know, for me, a linear wall along the river at the riverbank is a non-starter. I can't imagine a circumstance where any village board would approve just a blank concrete wall extending along the riverbank, you know, 4 to 7 feet tall or whatever it would have to be. Yeah, I agree with you, President Sells. I think there was maybe some misinformation out there that concept that was shown was a design and was what was going to be built, and that is just simply not the case. Again, I can't imagine us ever approving something like that. I do think there's a multitude of options to raise an elevation to 618 feet and to make it look good and make it be worthy of Riverside. There's no question in my mind that that's possible. So given all of those thoughts, opinions, I'm ready to move forward with the design phase, understanding that, as Trustee Hannon said, that I'll be the first to make a motion to pull the plug on this if we can't do it right. And if we can't, at the same time, do it in a way that's fair to all the residents, including the West Avenue residents along the river.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. Ms. Evans?
I also want to thank the residents who contacted the board about the project this week and who came in today. And actually, over the months, there's been a lot of engagement and I've learned a lot. And I just want to thank everyone for taking time to be involved. This mitigation will serve more than 100 homes and buildings in the area. That's a large group of town. That's a lot of area around town, a lot of residents. And the data is indicating that the climate has changed and will bring even more water to the area. Municipalities across the country are spending exorbitant amounts on flood mitigation. And we too have a responsibility to prepare for this. That said, I agree with Trustee Hannon and Trustee Pollack that the real challenge will be designing something that fits in with the charm and the natural beauty of Riverside. And I do think that's going to take some effort to determine what that will look like. And I also, I'm not just, you know, like it has to look nice, or I'm going to be a no vote also. So it's going to be very important for us to get that right.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Further comment?
Ben,
Please.
I was just going to say, I think that, you know, a lot of people saying that going with this is tying us into it because of the cost. And I guess I'm looking at it as, you know, we've paid money for traffic studies, or we've paid money for different kind of studies. That's a lot of money sometimes, but it's something that you need to know. And right now we need to know, is this something that will help with the serious problem that we have, not just in that area, but the backflow that makes into our sewer system in other areas of the town. So this could have a big impact on the village, and that we need to be willing to spend this money for the design phase. And I don't see how we can answer people's questions without moving into the design phase. So if this was a question of, are we approving the wall? I think none of us would be willing to say that we were willing to do that. But I'm looking at it as type of a consulting study as to whether or not this is a feasible option or not. And without going into the design phase, I don't think that we can make that decision. So that's what my opinion is.
Thank you, Ms. Collins. Mr. Gallegos, you had something else?
Yeah, just so the public is aware, about when should we expect the first public display of the design? So people can take a look at it. Do we have a timeline on that?
Not yet. I mean, there was, until this decision tonight is made, we didn't want to expend any village resources and moving in that direction. So
Okay.
once you know, if you decide to move forward, then we'll get that together.
Okay.
Anyone else? Mr. Gisa, any thoughts?
I mean, I agree with Trustee Collins. You know, I look at this as a consulting fee, and a couple $100,000 investment to determine whether or not it's the right choice it's worthy of that.
Thank you. Anything else? Please call the roll.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Hannan.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
The motion carries. Mr. Zerker and Mr. Gailey, thank you for staying with us this evening and being here a lot for us and answering all of our questions. We appreciate it. Bear with me a second. Get back to my agenda. I think that was it for tonight. There are no considerations. Does anyone have any new business? So we have a little litany to go through here. So
Yes.
I guess I'll let you do that first, Mr.
As I pop back into existence here. So you all may recall that in order to comply with the Open Meetings Act, we need for everyone to verify that they were able to follow all the discussion, both amongst the elected officials, the staff, as well as the participants in public comment. They were able to follow all that and understood it and were able to hear everything. So with that as background, I'll call on each of the elected officials and ask for an answer, yes or no, and this can be quick. Trustee Evans.
Yes.
Trustee Gallegos.
Yes.
Trustee Collins.
Yes.
Trustee Hannan.
Yes.
Trustee Pollock.
Yes.
Trustee Giza.
Yes.
President Sells.
Yes.
So we've complied with the Open Meetings Act extra requirements for virtual meetings. I turn it back over to President Sells.
Thank you, Mr. Melia. So we do have need for an executive session this evening to discuss the purchase of real property for the use of the public body and pending probable or imminent litigation. So I'd ask for a motion and a second to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene. No final action will be taken.
I'll make that
So
motion.
moved.
Motion by Mr. Gallegos, second by Mr.
Second.
So before I adjourn the meeting, let me just say to all of you and everyone who might be watching this at home, happy holidays to all of you. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe, take care of one another. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Good night and thank you.